No one in the courtroom expected Will Smith to show up. The energy in the room was already heavy, but when he walked through the rear doors, calm, composed, and alone, a hush fell over the entire chamber. All eyes turned, even the judge sat up straighter. This wasn't just a celebrity entrance. This was something else, something that shifted the tone completely. Before we continue, viewer discretion is strongly advised. This content is strictly for entertainment and educational purposes only. This is the detailed courtroom testimony for the ongoing federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs as reported by Inner City Press. Also, comment below where you are watching from and the time you are watching the video. Thank you. There had been no press statement, no legal filing, not even a whisper of Will being involved until now. While stories, rumors, and edited recordings about Diddy had circulated for months, Will had stayed quiet. No tweets, no interviews, just silence. But something had changed. Maybe it was the footage that had been played in private. Maybe someone close to him crossed a line. Maybe he simply couldn't stomach what he knew anymore. But now he was here. Not as an actor, not as a public figure, but as a man who had witnessed too much for too long. When Will approached the bench, even Diddy seemed stunned. The music mogul had been casually speaking with his lawyers when the judge glanced up and gave the smallest signal. Diddy turned, locked eyes with Will, and went pale. Will didn't wait to be called. He didn't look around for guidance. He just walked straight to the witness stand with quiet certainty and sat down. "I wasn't subpoenaed," Will began, his voice even and low. "I asked to be here." The judge allowed it. And just like that, the direction of the entire trial veered off course. What Will shared wasn't leaked online. It wasn't discussed on blogs. It wasn't the subject of TikTok threads or YouTube conspiracies. This wasn't recycled drama. It was something else, raw, real, and painfully personal. He talked about a party. Not the kind you expect when you hear the word celebrity. This was different. It started like most industry events, an invitation from a mutual acquaintance who was respected and well-connected. The kind of person whose name opened doors and who always knew a guy. Will had received similar invitations before and never thought twice. But this one? Something felt off from the beginning. The event was hosted at a remote mansion perched on a hillside. Elegant, isolated, and far from cell towers. Security was everywhere. Lined up SUVs, guards at every entrance, surveillance that felt more suffocating than protective. As soon as Will arrived, his phone was taken. They told him it was for privacy, for safety, to make guests comfortable. But in hindsight, it was clear. They didn't want anything leaving that house. Inside, the atmosphere was unsettling. Dim lights, smooth music, and mirrors that seemed placed just a little too strategically. No obvious cameras, but it felt like he was being watched. Will said he tried to shake the discomfort, telling himself it was just his nerves. After all, he was among peers. These were powerful people, familiar faces from movies, music, media, but the vibe was undeniably wrong. At some point, Diddy approached him, seemingly relaxed, a beer in hand, and said something strange. "Now you'll understand why our circle doesn't break." He smiled as he said it. Not warmly, not kindly, more like someone who knows a secret you don't. Will followed him downstairs, believing it was a private business chat. Instead, what he saw made his stomach turn. People were sprawled out in strange positions. Some looked completely out of it, inebriated or worse. A few were recognizable stars, others were clearly uncomfortable. And Diddy? He didn't blend in, he directed. Like a producer on a film set, he gave signals. Others recorded on discrete devices. Everyone else either looked away or pretended not to see. Will paused, took a breath. "I froze," he admitted. "I didn't know what to say or how to move, and that silence, that made me part of it." A week later, a package arrived at Will's private address. No return label, just a flash drive and a note. "Welcome to the family." Will remembered the moment he plugged in the flash drive. He was alone in his study, blinds drawn, hands slightly trembling. The file on it wasn't long, but it was enough. Footage from that night. Footage that showed him, just standing there, not participating, not doing anything illegal, but present, watching, looking confused, frozen. And somehow that was enough to implicate him. He stared at the screen, his mouth dry, heart pounding. "Even doing nothing can be used against you," he said to the courtroom. That's how this works. The delivery wasn't about memories. It was a message, a reminder, evidence, insurance, the kind of leverage you don't forget, that you don't talk about, that you carry like a weight in your chest. Will knew then what that night had been. Not a party, not networking. It was a trap, a carefully orchestrated machine designed to bind people together with shame, fear, and silence. And it worked. I kept my distance after that, he said, refused every invite, but every time I said no, something weird would happen. A film deal would fall apart. A director he was set to work with would suddenly ghost him. Scripts that had been tailored for him would end up in someone else's hands. It didn't feel like coincidence, not when it kept happening, not when he saw the same pattern with others. We'd talk about it, but only in code, Will explained. We were scared. Even a text message could be a trap. Sometimes actors would ask each other, "Did you go to the house?" or "Did you get a package?" That's all they'd need to say. Everyone understood. It meant you were now a part of something. And getting out? That wasn't so easy. In 2017, Will came close to going public. He confided in someone he thought he could trust. 3 days later, a blog posted a completely false story about his personal life. The timing wasn't random. The details, while made up, were believable enough to make defending himself seem like an admission of guilt. The message was clear. "We see you." He backed off. When the court asked why he waited so long, Will didn't dodge the question. "Because I was scared," he said plainly. "I was scared for my family, my name, everything I'd worked for." Diddy's reach, he explained, wasn't limited to Hollywood. It stretched into the press, corporate America, and even politics. His influence wasn't just about money, it was about control. Entire storylines could be shifted. Lawsuits could vanish, bad press could be buried. But if you were on the wrong side, everything about you could be twisted. And fast. "I saw it happen," Will said. Careers ended overnight. Friends stopped returning calls. People went from rising stars to total ghosts, and that wasn't an accident. He leaned forward slightly on the stand, hands folded tightly. "And I let it happen. That's the part that eats at me." For years, he stayed quiet. Justified it by telling himself others had it worse. Told himself he was protecting the people he loved. But then something happened that he couldn't ignore. Another witness, someone brave enough to speak publicly, suddenly changed their story. Will had read the article at home, with his kids playing in the next room. The witness recanted everything, claimed it never happened. Will knew better. "That's when it hit me," he said. The machine was still working, still breaking people. He didn't sleep that night, couldn't eat the next morning. And then he made a decision. "I called the prosecution," he said. "I told them everything. I gave them the drive, the notes, the messages I'd kept. I didn't want to carry it anymore." Will paused, his gaze steady. "I'm not here to play the victim. I'm here to admit that by staying silent, I became part of the problem." He looked across the courtroom, locking eyes with the jury. "And if I had spoken sooner, maybe fewer people would have been hurt." Will took a sip of water and looked down briefly, gathering his thoughts. The courtroom was still. Not even the reporters scribbled. He lifted his eyes again and continued. "After that first call to the prosecution, I kept thinking about the people who never made it that far. Talented, kind people. People who got trapped, just like I did, and the system made sure they didn't get out." He described the call he received from Diddy days after that first party. It began friendly enough, small talk, compliments. But then Diddy asked, "How'd you like your welcome package?" His tone was light, but the subtext wasn't. Will didn't respond right away. That's when Diddy shifted gears and started talking about future opportunities and collaborations, as if everything that had happened had bonded them. "You were expected to play along," Will said, "because now you were in." He remembered a specific conversation with Diddy that stuck with him. Will had mentioned an up-and-coming actor who had talent and drive, someone he thought could really make it. Diddy shrugged and said, "Shame when they don't understand how the game works." 2 months later, that actor vanished from the industry. No roles, no press, no buzz. Just gone. That wasn't coincidence, Will told the court. That was punishment. What haunted him, he said, wasn't just what happened to others, but how calculated it all was. This wasn't chaos. It was a blueprint. If you went along, you got offers, roles, endorsements. But if you resisted, the walls started closing in. He turned again toward the jury. I spent years convincing myself I had to stay quiet for the sake of my family. But that's not the truth. The truth is, I was afraid of what would happen if I stood up. He admitted that after that first event, the invitations kept coming. Politely worded emails, messages from middlemen, always vague but always pressing. Diddy never came at me directly again, not for a while, but things always happened right after I said no. The budgets for his films would mysteriously shrink. Directors would suddenly disappear from projects. Screenplays promised to him were handed to other actors. At first, he chalked it up to bad timing, but it kept happening like clockwork, and he wasn't the only one. I had conversations with people you'd know by name, who said the same things. We all had our own version of the package. We all had a reason to keep our mouths shut. He described these coded exchanges where no one ever said the real words out loud. It was like we were living in a spy movie, afraid that any sentence could come back to destroy us. In 2017, Will said he tried again to break away. This time, he was more careful. He didn't tell anyone, just started to pull away, quietly. And still, it happened. A blog ran a story about him, deeply personal, completely false, but detailed enough to make it stick. The timing was obvious. He hadn't even gone public yet, but the whispers had reached the wrong ears. I got the message loud and clear. Keep quiet, or we make it worse. Will turned to the judge. That's what this was about. Not just protecting Diddy. It was about protecting a whole web. One that reached into media, studios, labels, and even boardrooms. He explained that Diddy's influence extended far beyond the entertainment industry. He had connections with media executives, brand marketers, political donors, people who could pull strings behind the scenes, people who could bury your name or bury your career. He glanced again at Diddy. If you were on the inside, your problems disappeared. If you weren't, your life unraveled. And then came the email. The one that changed everything. The prosecution handed it to the judge, Exhibit 53. A thread of correspondence between Diddy and several executives discussing how to silence an actress who had begun talking about her experiences. The plan: discredit her with fake stories, pressure her through her projects, and if that failed, release embarrassing clips. 3 weeks later, that actress recanted. She said she was struggling with mental health and misremembered. She left the industry soon after. She hasn't worked since. Will's voice didn't shake. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't emotional in the traditional sense. But every word carried weight. And every second, you could feel the temperature in the room drop. The moment I read that email, he said, I knew this wasn't just about keeping people quiet. It was about destroying them before they even had a chance to speak. Will talked about the organizational structure behind it all, how the recordings were archived, how people were ranked based on their usefulness, and how those with leverage were elevated, while those who questioned the system were slowly erased. He described how a former assistant of Diddy's came forward in secret. This person had been carrying a weight for years, having managed digital files that could bring down careers or protect them. They didn't give Will the recordings. Those were already with federal investigators, but they did show him the catalog, the spreadsheet, the tags. They showed me my name, Will said, next to the date, next to notes about what I saw, who I was with. There were codes for behavior, for emotional state, whether I seemed drunk, whether I resisted. He paused, and then they showed me other names of people you'd recognize instantly, artists, actors, politicians, and next to those names, notes like minor present, compromised, useful. A murmur passed through the courtroom. That's when it stopped being about my story, Will said. It became something much bigger. The prosecution showed a second document, a text exchange between Will and Diddy from 2018. The third time Will had turned down an invite. It started civil, but it didn't stay that way. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Diddy wrote. I still have what we shared. Your kids would hate to see you in a different light. Will's eyes narrowed. That was the first time it felt like a real threat. No code, no subtlety. He told the court he didn't respond. Instead, he took action. He installed new security systems at his home, made sure they couldn't be accessed remotely. He started keeping a hard copy record of all messages, contacts, and interactions. He created burner lines of communication, set up emergency plans for his family. "I was preparing for a war I hoped would never come," he admitted, "but I couldn't ignore the signs anymore." He recalled a conversation with another witness, a fellow performer who was also wrestling with the decision to testify. What struck Will most wasn't their fear. It was the sense of helplessness. "They told me, I don't think anyone will believe me, but they might believe you." That hit him hard. "I'm not here because I'm brave," Will told the jury. "I'm here because someone else was brave first." He leaned back, hands open on the bench, and because sometimes staying silent costs more than speaking up. He asked them to imagine how many others didn't have his resources, his visibility, his connections. If someone like me, with every privilege you can think of, still felt trapped, what chance did anyone else have? The judge gave him permission to speak directly to Diddy. Will stood, squared his shoulders, and looked him dead in the eye. "You built an empire on fear," he said. "You called it loyalty. You said it was family, but what it really was control." Diddy didn't move. His lawyer whispered something, but Diddy didn't even blink. Will continued. "I saw what happened to the people who pushed back. You didn't build success. You manufactured silence." Then, from his pocket, Will pulled out the flash drive, the same one Diddy had sent him years earlier. "This was your insurance policy," he said. "But I'm giving it back, because it doesn't matter anymore. The truth's already out." He held it up for the jury to see, then placed it gently on the bench beside him. Will turned to face the jurors again. "If you think this is just about wild parties or Hollywood gossip, you're missing the bigger picture. This was a system designed to manipulate, to punish, to control the people we watch, the stories we hear, and the people who get to tell them." He returned to the witness stand, gathered his papers quietly, and stepped down. The room was silent as he left. For the first time in decades, Diddy wasn't in control of the narrative. He sat hunched over the defense table, scribbling frantic notes, his once calm composure shredded by the weight of what had just been said. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something. An exit, a loophole, a rescue, but found nothing. Meanwhile, Will walked out of the courtroom with his head down, flanked by security. He didn't stop to speak with the press, didn't wave, didn't even glance back. He got into a waiting car and left in silence. But the weight of his words stayed behind, and their echo moved through every hallway of the justice system and beyond. The judge recessed court early that day. Everyone needed time to process what they had just heard. Outside the building, chaos erupted. Reporters huddled around vans, broadcasting updates in real time. Social media feeds exploded. Hashtags trended globally. And across boardrooms in the entertainment industry, a quiet panic began to stir. Studio heads locked their doors for emergency meetings. Publicists received anxious calls from longtime clients. Anyone who had ever done business with Diddy was now a potential liability. Artists who had collaborated with him released carefully crafted statements, distancing themselves without sounding defensive. Some denied ever being involved in any wrongdoing. Others said they had no knowledge of what happened at private events. The damage control teams worked overtime, but online, the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Clips from Will's old interviews began resurfacing, moments where he flinched at Diddy's name, forced a smile, or shifted uncomfortably in his seat. People began to realize that the signs had always been there. They'd just been ignored. Even red carpet footage was reanalyzed. Viewers noticed the way Will and Diddy rarely interacted, even when they attended the same events. The awkward handshakes, the staged smiles, the subtle tension. Media analysts dug deeper. They found that several celebrities had experienced sudden career stalls after cutting ties with Diddy. Tabloids had run smear pieces on stars who had mysteriously dropped out of the spotlight. Negative press always seemed to follow a familiar pattern: speak out, disappear. And now, with Will's words still ringing in people's ears, that pattern started to make horrifying sense. Mental health professionals weighed in too. One therapist specializing in trauma told a journalist, What we're seeing is a collective realization. People are recognizing events they once normalized for what they truly were: manipulation, coercion, abuse. Behind the scenes, even the legal system started to shift. Within 48 hours of Will's testimony, the prosecution confirmed that 3 additional high-profile witnesses had agreed to testify, individuals who had previously declined due to fear of backlash. But now, silence was starting to crack. Investors reacted next. Stock prices for companies tied to Diddy's many ventures fluctuated wildly. Brands paused endorsement deals, releasing short, cautious statements saying they were gathering information. Some even scrubbed his name from websites. Streaming platforms quietly pulled playlists he'd curated, burying them deep in the algorithm. But the most damning fallout wasn't about business. It was the clarity of Will's story, the detail, the documentation. This wasn't emotional speculation, it was evidence. Lined up, organized, cross-referenced. One legal analyst said, "This isn't just a powerful voice, it's a credible, verifiable account that supports multiple other testimonies." Suddenly, others found the courage to speak. Writers, assistants, mid-level producers, people who had been too scared to come forward for years, began to break their silence. Not just about Diddy, but about the entire culture that had kept them quiet. The reckoning had begun, and it was bigger than one man. Will, for his part, stayed out of the spotlight. Those close to him said he was focusing on his family and his mental health. He didn't do interviews. He didn't release a statement. A friend later told a reporter, "He didn't do this for attention. He did it because it had to be done." And as the case moved forward, legal experts agreed his testimony couldn't be brushed off, not because of his fame, but because of the consistency, the documentation, the courage. It wasn't just a celebrity speaking out. It was a reckoning. Stay tuned and subscribe to the channel if you want to stay updated on the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.